Lover's Leap by Frank Quinton. It was bad enough in the daytime, being on the pier with all its memories. At least one had the anonymity of being a face in the holiday crowd. Tonight, in the summer theatre, it was far worse. Bernard stared down the passage that led on stage from his dressing room. It was like a condemned man's last walk, but he mustn't dramatise this. Flicking a thread of cotton from his trousers, he straightened his waistcoat and went on his way with upright elegance. He felt the soldierly gaze of the stage doorkeeper in his box at the far end, and the breeze of freedom from the stage door beyond. Then he wheeled left and walked into the wings. In the aura from the stage, he saw Barbara Johnson's wicked wink from the lighting control board. She played the part of his stage daughter and had just made an exit. He squeezed her fingers briefly and set his face towards the stage. "Come on, Richard. Richard, darling, are you there?" called his stage wife. "Coming, my dear." He ran on and paused for the ripple of applause. He opened his mouth and then nearly forgot his lines. There he was, just as they had said, the bald man in the front row, with the mayoral insignia round his neck. What the rest of the company didn't know was that it was his brother, Paul. Somehow Bernard managed to act his way through to the end of the play, and even to take 3 curtain calls. Had Paul recognised him? Probably not, for he was heavily made up, and his stage name was Howard Booth. Had been for years, a name he brought back from his tour in Melbourne. On the way back to the dressing room, he spoke to Harold Hitchin, the stage manager of the smart little touring play. "I don't feel like meeting a mayor tonight. Please don't invite his worship backstage." Hitchin bristled. "In a seaside town like this, it doesn't pay to be unsociable," he rapped. "A little hobnobbing with the mayor will encourage other townsfolk to see the play. Anyway, you can relax. He seems to have vanished." Good, thought Bernard, letting himself into the dressing room. It's not often that I'm that lucky. He dropped into a gilded armchair in the corner. A black cloud hovered over his mind, probably the heat, and he closed his eyes. "Darling, may I come in?" Barbara knocked and put her head round the door. "Don't forget the party tonight." "Oh no, you must excuse me this time, my dear." "Why, where are you going?" she pouted. He tried to make it flippant. "For a walk on the pier, I expect." The first excuse that came into his head. She looked at him with a question in her eyes. "Not tonight, my darling," he repeated. "Oh, very well then. Good night, Dad." And she was gone. Dad? Yes, he was getting old. 12 years older than that faraway April, when he stole the heart of his brother's pretty wife, Ella. It hadn't lasted long. Ella had moved on to other men's arms. Many other men. Who was she kissing now? Certainly not Paul. Him she never returned to. That would have taken real guts. There was a tap on the door. "Come in." "Good evening, Bernard," said Paul. Bernard jerked upright. The enamelled mayoral chain round his brother's neck cast a golden reflection on his throat. He was immaculate, calm, steady-eyed. Bernard rose and held out a shaky hand. "It's been a long time," he said inadequately. Paul gripped the hand. He looked at him and said, "I see you haven't changed much. Still got your hair, your fine teeth." "And now a beard," said Bernard with a forced smile. "Oh yes, it's one of your professional disguises, of course. The kind you wear when you want to be taken for someone else. And you've your mayoral chain. I thought it was only worn on special occasions." This is one. Brothers meeting, after 12 long years. Bernard nodded agreement. Shall we go and have a drink at the Albion? That's not a fitting celebration. I've a better idea. Why not be my guest? I have a perfect meal waiting at home for you. Bernard's hungry stomach applauded the suggestion. He had a passion for good food, and Paul was a fine hobby chef. Funny how men with hair ate well, and men without cooked well. Something made him hesitate, though. He was the same flesh and blood as the other, and he could not believe that such a proud nature would so readily forgive the man who stole his wife. Unless, of course, he wanted to be rid of her. And that might well be the explanation. They had stopped near a large, specially built Rolls, waiting outside the foyer, when the problem was suddenly solved. A chauffeur whipped the car door open for the mayor, and his worship ushered Bernard inside ahead of him. "Home, please, George," he ordered. Paul sank into the foam-soft seat with its broad arm. Like most actors, he adored luxury. A car radio whispered orchestral music, and the mayor offered him a small but good cigar. Suddenly he succumbed. Here he was being whisked in a luxurious car whose princely headlights shed their radiance along the hedgerows to a good dinner at a large, well-appointed house. Might as well sit back and enjoy it. There was one question he would have asked, but didn't dare. Was there still that same cosy swimming pool at the bottom of the garden? Or had Paul filled it in to bury the memory of that occasion when he came home unexpectedly from London and caught Ella and Bernard bathing in the nude? Paul removed his mayoral chain and folded the medallions inside a velvet-lined case, which he placed in his pocket. "Phew, it's a sweltering night," he said. "How about a nice cold swim before dinner?" Bernard squirmed. "In the pool," he said. "Where else?" smiled Paul. "It's been modernized since you last saw it. Contemporary tiles, concealed lighting, a regular little Lido." The big car glided up a curved drive and stopped in front of a Georgian house. The lights were on, and through the tall windows Bernard could see the 18th century staircase descending through 4 floors. Its scrolled iron balustrade was decorated with vine leaves, and debouched onto a white marble-floored hall, where a Moorish hanging lamp shed mysterious light onto a Grecian statue with averted head. Paul produced a big key to unlock the front door, and Bernard stared. "No servants. Marie, the cook housekeeper, is off for the weekend, and the day help finishes at 5. Bernard sweated. Suddenly he was aware of the ceaseless, cheerless chirping of the grasshoppers which infested the fields around. From every blade of grass and every tree for miles around they were saying, "Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it," as he entered the house. Paul switched on the rosy lighting in the lounge and opened a wine cupboard. "Feel like a drink?" Bernard nodded. He had an embarrassing memory of the beautiful staircase which welcomed them into the house. If it could gossip, it would resound with squeals of laughter, the laughter of a faithless wife, whom he chased upstairs to her husband's empty bedroom. But mercifully it was silent. Paul held up a bottle to the light and examined it critically. "You'll like this," he said. "It's a Californian wine. Pinot Noir, 1965. I discovered it on a trade visit to Los Angeles. Fit for a prince." He wiped a wine glass and poured the beverage out with a connoisseur's care. Then he handed it to Bernard. "You can finish the bottle after our swim," he said, putting it back in the wine cupboard. "Aren't you having a drink then?" "Of course, mine's a gin and tonic," Paul helped himself to them. He smiled. "I remember you once said it was a curious non-drink." They toasted glasses, and he added, "I suppose you would call me now a non-husband." Here it was, his first reference to his brother's adultery. And it was so casual that Bernard was encouraged to say, "I want to talk to you about that." Paul dismissed it with a wave. "Let the past bury the past," he said. The other closed his eyes and nodded. It was incredibly philosophic, but perhaps understandable. What a damned good Yankee wine this was. Paul savoured his brother's approval. A little overdone, perhaps, but then there was not a more pleasure-loving man in the whole wide world than Bernard. Deeply admiring of good food, good music, and of course, not so good women. Oversensitive to pain, to love, to criticism. Such delicate powers of appreciation merited much. The host rubbed his hands briskly. "Now, we'll have that dip. You'll find a pair of swimming trunks, towel and sandals in the wardrobe drawer of the guest room. Hurry now, because there's a treat waiting." Bernard looked at him. "Pimento with fried chicken." Paul held up a demurring hand. "Don't worry, I know your favourites." Going up the stairs, Bernard felt the past whispering to him, a memory that caressed. Warm, white, smiling. He reached the landing and walked down the oak-floored passage to the guest room, with one little heart tug, as he passed the bedroom door on the right. Then he came to his room and looked for the mirror, an actor's habit which he had acquired from living in innumerable digs. There was a tall cheval in an alcove, and he saw himself in it. Uncertain of this house, and above all, the motives of its master. He cheered up again when he stripped, self-admiring his flat, youthful belly, his still evident waist. Not bad for 48. The swimming trunks were a musty red pair, but they would do. He would have liked a bathing cap to protect his prized head of hair. Still, it would have been boastful to inquire about one, Paul being so bald. He put the trunks on and picked up the rolled towel that lay in the large drawer underneath the wardrobe. Something slipped from the striped folds and crashed at his bare feet. An old scent bottle of unusual design. The one he bought as a Christmas present for Ella in '55, the year before she left Paul. He unscrewed the top of the triangular bottle and put it to his nose. Odourless, scoured clean, not so much as a whiff of her. Disturbing it should be hidden in his towel, like that. He went downstairs, lingering softly, edgily, on each shallow step. Paul was waiting in the garden, which sloped down to the water. "Just a quickie," he said. "Race you to the pool." The challenge put Bernard on his mettle. It would have been polite to let his host win, but vanity prevailed, and he shot ahead to the edge of the pool. Running to the springboard, he vaulted into the air, a perfect dive. Too late, he smelt the fumes that were rising. In another half-second, he hit the surface and dropped head first into the liquid. It gripped him with a paralysing brutality, from the crown of his head to the soles of his feet. His delicate, sensation-loving skin felt everything. First, a sudden scourging by 10,000 whips of fire, each biting spitefully into his flesh. Then, as he screamed, the acid began to torture him to death, dissolving his hair, burning and blinding his eyes, accomplishing an unspeakable cruelty to his body. It choked back his screams by pouring into his mouth. There, it murdered the taste buds that had so delicately savoured the Californian wine. and flowed down his throat and lungs and into his stomach. Every moment seemed to last a century, but it was really a fairly quick death. It was followed by a deep silence, a silence in which the acid continued to eat his corpse as it slid slowly into the depths. There was a chuckle from the lawn. Paul took a cigar from the dressing gown folded over his arm and felt for a match without taking his eyes off the scene. He lit the cigar and puffed a cloud of fragrant smoke to combat the miasma of the pool. At last he became aware the phone was ringing in the house behind him and went indoors. "Hello?" He picked up the receiver. "Paul!" barked Briggs, angrily. "So I found you at last. Call yourself a manufacturer. What the hell are you doing about that last delivery of acid? I had to close down the battery reclaiming plant this afternoon because the stuff hadn't arrived. I can't operate with exhausted chemicals. You know that." "My dear old Jack," said Paul apologetically. "I'll see you get a delivery tomorrow. Sorry about the delay, but I didn't have any carboys available. You see," and he looked through the picture window at the pool again, "I had a rush job on my hands." "Rush job? I'm surprised at you. Don't you ever think about an old customer?" I do. But when he had hung up, Paul added, privately, "And I don't forget a cool customer either."